When most people hear the word art, they imagine objects. Paintings hanging in galleries, sculptures standing on pedestals, novels printed on paper, symphonies fixed in musical notation. These examples are not wrong, yet they easily conceal something fundamental. What we call art becomes art only when it is experienced. A canvas without a viewer is pigment on fabric. An unread novel is ink on pages. Music exists as music only when it is heard, unfolding in time for a listener. Once we recognize this, the focus of aesthetics shifts. Instead of asking what is an artwork, we begin to ask, what does an artwork do to a perceiver? How does it transform perception, emotion, and imagination? Art is not merely a thing in the world. It is a distinctive way of encountering the world, a particular mode of experience. In Lecture 1, we saw that aesthetics concerns our sensibility, the way forms, sounds, images, and appearances speak to us. In this lecture, we deepen the idea by examining the structure of aesthetic experience. We will ask how artworks guide attention, how perception changes when practical concerns are suspended, and why certain encounters feel deeply meaningful even when they have no obvious use. Two philosophers will help us. Immanuel Kant, who analyzed the internal structure of aesthetic judgment, and John Dewey, who argued that art is an intensified form of ordinary experience that arises from and returns to everyday life. Their views differ, yet they complement one another. Together, they show why aesthetic experience feels both personal and universal, spontaneous and yet strangely guided. Before turning to them, we must first understand how aesthetic perception differs from the ordinary, practically oriented perception through which we move in daily life. Ordinary perception is usually goal-directed. We look at things because we want to achieve something, to find our way through a street, to locate an object, to assess a situation, to make a decision. Everyday attention is therefore primarily practical. It serves action, usefulness, and problem solving. We tend to filter what we see and hear according to what is relevant for our current purposes. Aesthetic perception suspends this practical interest. It is not that we become incapable of acting, but that for a moment we stop asking what something is good for, how we might use it, or what we should do with it. The ordinary filters of utility loosen. As they do, details usually ignored come into focus. The arrangement of forms, the relation of colors and light, the rhythm of movements, the atmosphere of a space. This kind of perception appears in everyday life more often than we realize. A sudden shift in sunlight transforms a quiet street into something intense and striking. The echo of footsteps in a corridor arranges itself into a kind of composition. The colors of fruit on market stall suddenly vibrate with unexpected richness. These moments are brief, but they are real. They show that aesthetic perception is not a rare state reserved for museums. It is a hidden dimension of experience that can emerge at any time. Artworks bring this hidden dimension to the surface, intensify it, and make it available in a focused way. Painters, composers, writers, and filmmakers construct forms that invite, guide, and sustain this heightened mode of attention. To experience a work of art is not simply to glance at a picture or to hear a melody. It is to enter a process that unfolds in time, in which perception, feeling, and meaning gradually weave together. To understand this process more clearly, we turn first to Kant's analysis of what happens when we say, "This is beautiful." Immanuel Kant published the Critique of Judgment in 1790. He wanted to understand what is going on when someone makes an aesthetic judgment such as "this is beautiful." He was not primarily interested in which objects are beautiful or in drawing up categories of beauty. His question was more radical. How does the human mind function during an aesthetic experience? Why does beauty feel significant? And why does the pleasure of beauty seem to reach beyond the private feelings of a single individual? Kant distinguishes aesthetic judgments from other kinds of judgment. Scientific judgments rely on concepts and laws. Moral judgments rest on principles, duties, and norms. Aesthetic judgments, by contrast, arise from feeling. When we judge something beautiful, the pleasure does not come from recognizing a concept. For example, this is a rose, or this is a symmetrical object. It is rooted in the way we experience the form. The pleasure of beauty is, for Kant, a specific kind of feeling. It is a sense of harmony and freedom in our mental activity. We do not apply a rule or pursue a practical aim. We simply take delight in the very act of perceiving. Here, Kant detects a striking paradox. Aesthetic pleasure is undeniably subjective. It is a matter of how something feels to us. Yet, when we say this sunset is beautiful, we speak as though others ought to agree. We do not merely report a private preference such as "I like mint ice cream." We implicitly appeal to a wider audience. Kant refers to this as the universal voice of aesthetic judgment. The judgment does not state a fact about the object, yet it still carries a claim to communicability. This suggests that beauty is not simply arbitrary. It arises from a structure in our cognitive faculties, imagination and understanding, that other human beings share. Kant's central idea is that aesthetic pleasure emerges from a free harmony or free play between imagination and understanding. The imagination explores the object freely, moving among its forms, relations, and possibilities without being constrained by concepts. The understanding, for its part, senses a kind of order and coherence, but without forcing the experience under a determinate rule. In this state, no clear concept is formed and no practical goal is pursued. Instead, we experience what Kant calls purposiveness without purpose, as if the object were designed for our faculties, fitting them perfectly, even though it serves no specific end. The form appears meaningful, yet its meaning is not instrumental. Kant famously describes aesthetic pleasure as disinterested. This does not mean bored or indifferent. It means that the pleasure is not tied to desire or possession. One may desire a rose for its scent or a chair for its comfort. But when one judges the rose beautiful, one brackets these interests. The joy lies in the contemplating of the form, not in owning or using the object. This explains why beauty invites repeated contemplation. We return again and again to certain paintings or pieces of music, not to consume them, but to dwell in the experience they offer. The object remains what it is. It is our mode of perceiving that becomes free, focused, and intensified. Kant's analysis shows where aesthetic pleasure comes from, why it feels at once subjective and yet capable of being shared, why it seems disinterested and yet emotionally intense, and why it slows down and deepens perception. It also suggests why beauty can be experienced as a form of freedom. In aesthetic contemplation, our cognitive faculties play together without being subordinated to external goals. Kant thus reveals the inner structure of aesthetic experience. To see how art appears when we start from lived experience and its temporal arc, we turn to Dewey. John Dewey, writing in Art as Experience in 1934, approaches aesthetics from a different direction. Rather than beginning with the mind's internal structures, he begins with the flow of human life. He asks, how art grows out of everyday activities, and how in turn it transforms the way we live and feel. For Dewey, art is not an isolated luxury or an elite domain. It is an intensified form of experience itself, an experience in which the structures and rhythms that already shape everyday life become more concentrated, unified, and luminous. Dewey's starting point is simple but far-reaching. Human life is not a mere series of disconnected impressions. Our activities have form. They have beginnings, developments, tensions, climaxes, and resolutions. When we cook, build, argue, love, mourn, or solve a problem, our experience follows rhythms and arcs. There is movement, growth, conflict, and closure. Art, for Dewey, grows directly out of this experiential structure. A symphony, for example, does not invent the pattern of tension and release. It intensifies and organizes it. A painting does not create order out of nothing. It condenses and clarifies relations that we also find in our everyday dealings with space, light, and objects. Art is life's own form made explicit. Because of this, Dewey rejects the idea that art lives in a separate realm. He points to early human practices, tools decorated with patterns, songs sung during work, dances performed in rituals, stories told in the evening. These activities are already laden with rhythm, form, and expressive power. Art does not break away from them. It arises within them and refines them. In this sense, art is not opposed to labor, ritual, or ordinary interaction. It is what happens when these activities become more focused, more coherent, more fully experienced. It is life heightened and clarified. For Dewey, a painting, poem, or musical score is not the artwork in its full sense. It is a structure, a possibility, a kind of score for experience. The artwork becomes complete only in reception, when a viewer, reader, or listener enters its world, follows its arc, feels its tensions and resolutions, and integrates it into their own life. This is why art can be both deeply personal and socially shared. Each person's experience is unique, yet all respond to the same structured form. The artwork offers a path, the audience walks it. Modern life, Dewey observes, tends to fragment experience. Fast rhythms, routine tasks, constant information, and practical pressures can split perception, emotion, and meaning into disconnected pieces. Aesthetic experience, by contrast, can restore unity. In a rich encounter with art, what we see, what we feel, and what we understand are fused into a single coherent episode. This is one reason why art can feel healing or grounding. It does not remove us from life. It returns us to it, but in a more integrated way. One of Dewey's most important insights is that aesthetic experience always unfolds in time, even when the object appears static. No one grasps a painting or poem in a single glance. The eye wanders, compares, discovers. The mind tests and revises impressions. A work of art structures this temporal process. It does not simply present content, it shapes how that content is gradually revealed. This thought links Dewey's account directly to Kant's. Both see aesthetic experience as a distinctive mode of perception and thought, characterized by freedom, form, and unfolding. Dewey places special emphasis on time and the continuity between art and everyday life. If every aesthetic experience unfolds in time, then every art form organizes time in its own way. The perception of a painting, the listening of music, the reading of literature and the viewing of film all involve guided temporal processes. The work shows us not only what we perceive, but how and in what rhythm we perceive it. When we first encounter a painting, we often receive a general impression, an overall tonal atmosphere, a basic spatial composition, a mood. Only afterwards does the eye begin to move through the picture. This movement is rarely random. It is guided by compositional means, contrasts of light and dark, lines and contours, repetitions and echoes, areas of calm and of intensity. Consider Caravaggio. At first glance, his paintings strike us with dramatic chiaroscuro, bright figures emerging from deep shadow. As we dwell on them, our attention begins to follow the direction of gestures, the meeting of gazes, the play of light across skin and fabric. The painting quietly directs our gaze from one node of significance to the next, revealing its inner structure over time. Or think of Pierre Mondrian. Initially, we may see only a rigid grid of lines and rectangles. Yet, as we continue to look, subtle tensions and balances emerge. Slight variations in proportion, sensitive shifts in color, a carefully calibrated asymmetry. What seemed static becomes dynamic. The eye traces paths, detects patterns, senses equilibrium. The painting is no longer an object, it is a guided visual journey. In all such cases, the painting does not give everything at once. It asks for time, and as we grant time, it repays us with depth. Music is perhaps the most purely temporal art. Nothing in music exists outside time. A melody begins, develops, reaches a peak, falls away. Harmonic progressions move from stability to tension and back again. Rhythms create expectations, then fulfill or disrupt them. A listener cannot simply skip ahead to grasp a piece of music. The work reveals itself only as it is heard. A listener cannot simply skip ahead to grasp a piece of music. The work reveals itself only as it is heard. One does not need theoretical knowledge to feel this. We sense repetition, variation, contrast, build-up and release in our bodies and emotions. Even a simple song exhibits these dynamics. Repetition creates familiarity. Slight changes create expressive movement. The emotional power of music lies precisely in this shared temporal arc. As the piece moves, our attention and feelings move with it. Literary works also unfold in time. A poem or novel does not deliver its meaning sentence by sentence in isolation. It builds significance gradually, through the accumulation and transformation of images, motifs, characters, and scenes. In the novels of Virginia Woolf, for example, the central experience is often not external action, but the rhythm of consciousness, shifting perceptions, memories, reflections. The reader learns to inhabit this rhythm, to follow the fine movements of thought and feeling. The plot is less important than the pattern of inner life that emerges over many pages. Meaning in literature is therefore not a single message that could be summarized and extracted. It is a temporal pattern of experience that we live through as we read. Film combines many elements: moving images, framing, editing, dialogue, sound, music. All of them shape time. The length of a shot, the speed of cuts, the movement of the camera, the density of sound, each of these parameters organizes the viewer's attention. Andrei Tarkovsky's filmmaking slows time through the use of long takes. A single shot may show nothing more than water dripping, wind in leaves, or a person standing still, yet the duration invites a deeper gaze. Tarkovsky famously called cinema sculpting in time. The film does not simply show events, it shapes the viewer's experience of temporality itself. Chantal Akerman uses stillness and repetition in a different way. Her extended static shots make us aware of slight shifts in light, posture, or sound. Ordinary spaces become charged with tension. The viewer becomes acutely aware of being in time with the image. Film thus makes especially clear what is true for all art. An artwork is not only something we see or hear, it is a path we follow, a temporally structured experience. One of the most powerful devices in art is framing. A painting selects a portion of the world and sets it apart. A photograph captures a single moment or gesture. A poem isolates an image or thought and surrounds it with silence. The frame says, "Look here, look in this way." The photographer Henri Cartier-Bresson spoke of the moment décisif, the decisive moment. In his photographs, composition is not accidental. Lines, shapes and movements converge in a way that crystallizes a situation. The frame not only cuts out a piece of reality, it reveals a rhythm and order that everyday perception might overlook. The same is true in film. A close-up held for a long time creates a very different intensity from a distant static shot. The viewer does not merely see what the camera sees, they follow the camera's way of looking. The frame becomes a principle of organization for perception. Art also guides attention by emphasizing certain elements through repetition, contrast, prolongation, or interruption. In music, the return to a motive, perhaps altered, draws our focus and emotion to it. In poetry, a recurring image, word, or rhythm becomes a center of gravity. In film, a shot that lasts longer than narrative efficiency would require tells us that something in this moment matters, even if we cannot immediately say what. In painting, repeated forms, strong contrasts, or sudden empty areas function similarly. They create a pulse, a pattern of expectation and surprise. The eye and the mind are led from one point to another along an implicit route. Many artworks are best understood in terms of atmosphere. Atmosphere is more the mood and more the message. It is the overall weather of a work, the felt quality of the space it opens. In the landscapes of Caspar David Friedrich, for example, what strikes us is not only the specific motifs, rocks, sea, clouds, but the pervasive sense of distance, stillness, and melancholy. The viewer enters a spacious, quiet world in which time seems slowed and thought becomes reflective. Atmosphere is created through light, color, rhythm, texture, but it cannot be paraphrased. It is a way of being in the presence of the work, and it shapes how we breathe, feel, and think while we attend to it. Every artwork becomes real only in the act of reception. The work proposes an arc, the viewer, listener, or reader traces it. The artwork offers forms. The audience fills them with associations, memories, emotions. This does not mean that anything goes. The work does not allow every possible interpretation with equal plausibility. But within the structure the artwork provides, each person's experience is slightly different. Two people may look at the same painting and notice different aspects. The same person may return years later and discover something new that was invisible to them before. Aesthetic meaning, then, is neither entirely in the object nor entirely in the subject. It arises in the meaning between form and attention. Modern aesthetics has increasingly recognized that aesthetic experience is not confined to artworks in the narrow sense. It also appears in our encounters with nature, with well-shaped objects, with urban spaces, and with social rituals. Wherever perception becomes focused on form, rhythm, presence, and meaning beyond mere usefulness, an aesthetic dimension opens. Encounters with nature are perhaps the most widespread source of aesthetic experience. The gradual color shift of a sunset, the symmetry of leaves, the monumental line of a mountain range, the shimmering surface of water, the silence of falling snow. These phenomena can move us deeply without any need for theoretical knowledge. We do not ask what they are good for, we simply let them be present. In such moments, perception is intensified. The world feels more there than usual. Nature reveals structures of light, movement, and space that can change how we see everything else. Well-designed objects also carry aesthetic qualities. A chair with balanced proportions, a ceramic cup that sits perfectly in the hand, a pen that glides smoothly, a handwritten letter shaped with care. These things please us not only because they are useful, but because they express a certain character through their form. Over time, objects acquire patina, wear, and marks of use. A worn wooden handle, a faded book cover, a polished stone kept in a pocket, these traces of time and touch can be experienced aesthetically. They record a history. In this way, everyday things can become sites of quiet beauty where material and time meet. Cities are rich fields of aesthetic experience. Street patterns, building facades, materials, colors, signs, trees, and people all combine to create rhythms and textures. A badly designed space may feel chaotic, disorienting, or oppressive. A well-designed one may feel open, coherent, or inviting. Urban design thus has an aesthetic and emotional impact. It shapes how we move, how we rest, how safe or anxious we feel. The city is not only a network of functions, it is also an environment of forms and atmospheres that affect our inner life. Social life is full of gestures and rituals that possess aesthetic dimensions. A handshake, a bow, a congratulatory embrace, a funeral procession, a wedding ceremony, or a public commemoration all have special arrangements, rhythms, repeated patterns of movement and sound. These actions do not only symbolize something, they create a shared experiential space in which participants feel connected. The form of the ritual, its pace, its order, its pauses, contributes to its emotional power. In this sense, the aesthetic is not opposed to the ethical or the social. It is one of the ways in which human beings shape their common life. Aesthetic experience, therefore, is not a rare luxury. It is a fundamental possibility of everyday existence wherever we are receptive to form, presence, and meaning. If aesthetic experience permeates both art and ordinary life, why is it important? Why should we care about this dimension of our existence? There are several interconnected reasons. Aesthetic experience gives us a kind of understanding that cannot be reduced to concepts, propositions, or arguments. A musical work can make us feel the structure of tension and release, hope and resignation. A painting can reveal the rhythm of light, the weight of a gesture, the complexity of an expression. A poem can give shape to a mood that would escape any definition. This is not less than rational knowledge. It is a different mode of insight. We might call it knowing through perception or sensuous understanding. Certain aspects of reality, especially those involving quality, tone, atmosphere, and inner life, are accessible only in this way. Aesthetic experience also educates the senses. Art teaches us to look more carefully, to listen more attentively, to notice more subtle differences. Someone who has learned to contemplate a painting patiently will often see everyday scenes differently. Someone who has really listened to music may hear conversations, street noises, or silence with greater sensitivity. Someone who has read literature closely may become more attentive to the nuances of their own and others' emotions. Aesthetic sensitivity is not merely a matter of taste. It is a training of attention, discrimination, and empathy. It enlarges our capacity to perceive and respond to the world. Contemporary life often feels fragmented. We switch rapidly between tasks, devices, and contexts. Information floods us, our attention is scattered. In this situation, aesthetic experience can provide moments of unity. In a deep encounter with a work of art, perception, emotion, and thought are not pulled apart, they converge. This unity does not mean escape from reality. Rather, it offers a coherent experience within reality, a moment in which our relation to the world becomes more whole and more intelligible. Finally, aesthetic forms create shared points of reference. People who love the same book, painting, or piece of music share something important, even if they have never met. Communities remember themselves through songs, monuments, stories, festivals, and symbols. These are aesthetic as well as historical and political forms. Art, in this sense, does not erase individual differences. Instead, it provides a space in which different individuals can meet through a common experience. It allows emotions, questions, and values to be communicated where abstract discussion might fail. At this point, we can see more clearly how Kant and Dewey illuminate different aspects of the same phenomenon. Far from contradicting one another, they reveal the double structure of aesthetic experience. Kant looks at aesthetic experience from the inside. He asks what happens in the subject, how the imagination and the understanding play together, how pleasure arises, what beauty seems communicable. He shows that aesthetic judgment is rooted in a free, harmonious activity of our mental powers. There is no practical aim, no concept to be applied, no rule to be followed. The mind enjoys its own freedom and order. For Kant, this explains why beauty feels both personal and yet addressed to others. The pleasure is mine, but it arises from capacities that we all share as human beings. The universality of aesthetic judgment is based not on objective properties of things, but on the common structure of our sensibility. Dewey, by contrast, examines aesthetic experience from the outside. He looks at the arc of experience as it unfolds in time and in the world. He emphasizes how art grows out of ordinary activities and returns to them, how it intensifies and unifies experience, and how artworks have the structure of a complete episode with beginning, development, tension, climax, and closure. For Dewey, aesthetic experience is not an interruption of life, but its most integrated form. Art reveals the continuity between our everyday rhythms and the heightened experiences we call aesthetic. If we read Kant and Dewey together, we see that their views fit like two halves of a circle. Kant clarifies the inner harmony of the faculties, Dewey clarifies the outer shape of the experiential arc. Kant reveals the freedom of aesthetic perception, Dewey reveals its unity. Kant focuses on the subjective play of imagination and understanding. Dewey focuses on the objective, temporal form of the work and its reception. Taken together, they show that aesthetic experience is both an inner state and an outer process, a free resonance within the mind and a structured unfolding in time. From this double perspective, aesthetic experience appears as a two-directional movement. Inwardly, it is a state of freedom, play, and harmony in our faculties. Outwardly, it is a path through forms, rhythms, and tensions that the artwork offers. This is why aesthetic experience can be both liberating and grounding. It frees thought and at the same time organizes experience. In this sense, aesthetics is not a marginal branch of philosophy. It tells us something essential about human beings as sensing, interpreting, and form-giving creatures. One of the most prominent effects of aesthetic experience is its power to change how we see the world. After a strong encounter with art, people often report that colors seem brighter, sounds more articulate, everyday scenes more meaningful. This is not a romantic exaggeration. It reflects a real reorientation of perception and emotion. Great artworks often reveal aspects of reality that habitual perception overlooks. After spending time with the paintings of Johannes Vermeer, one may notice the quiet drama of light on a table or the subtle interplay between interior and exterior space. After reading Marcel Proust, one may become more aware of the fine texture of memory and the way past and present interpenetrate. After listening to the music of Arvo Pärt, one may begin to hear silence not as emptiness, but as a resonant field. In such cases, art does not create a new world. It sharpens our faculties for this one. It makes visible and audible what was previously latent. Many artworks deliberately defamiliarize the ordinary. Russian formalist critics, such as Viktor Shklovsky, called this the effect ostranenie, making things strange. A familiar object or situation is presented in such a way that it becomes uncanny, luminous, or thought-provoking. A shadow on a wall becomes a complex composition. A simple chair becomes a study in proportion and presence. A common word, repeated or displaced, becomes pure sound. An ordinary street appears as a stage. Habit loosens its grip. We see again what we had stopped really seeing. This break in routine perception can awaken wonder and curiosity. It returns us to the world as if for the first time. Art can also move in the opposite direction, making the strange more familiar and accessible. A distant culture can become understandable through a novel. An obscure emotion can be clarified by a piece of music. A historical catastrophe can become imaginatively present through film or theatre. Here, art does not trivialize or simplify what is difficult. Rather, it gives foreign experiences a form in which we can approach them. In this way, aesthetic experience expands our world in two directions. It estranges the familiar and familiarizes the strange. As we become more aware of the aesthetic dimension of experience, we start to notice small moments in daily life that carry a similar intensity. Patterns of light on a wooden floor, the sound of rain on a metal roof, the texture of a worn page, the precise rhythm of a conversation, the calm of a shared silence. None of these are works of art, yet each can produce a brief but genuine aesthetic shock. For a second, the world stands out, heightened and present. Objects we use every day can also take on aesthetic significance. A favorite cup, a well-cut coat, a smooth stone held in the hand. Their weight, texture and form become part of our sensory and emotional world. Social interactions too have aesthetic aspects. The choreography of bodies in a crowded space, the pacing of a ceremony, the ebb and flow of voices at a gathering. When we notice these patterns, we already are perceiving aesthetically. Aesthetic experience matters because it unites three fundamental dimensions of human existence: perception, emotion, and meaning. It shows that seeing and hearing are never purely mechanical. They are already bound up with how we feel and what the world signifies for us. Art and aesthetic perception therefore contribute to self-knowledge. By learning to see more, we often learn to understand ourselves and others more deeply. By becoming sensitive to form, we become more sensitive to the lives that those forms express. In this lecture, we have explored how aesthetic perception shapes our world. We began by shifting our focus from artworks as objects to art as experience. We saw that art is not a separate realm detached from everyday life, but an intensified, clarified mode of being in the world. It arises from the same experiential fabric that makes up our daily existence and returns to transform that existence. We examined the difference between ordinary, practical perception and aesthetic attention. Ordinary perception selects what is useful. Aesthetic perception suspends utility and allows form, presence, and atmosphere to come forward. This suspension opens the space in which beauty, expressiveness, and meaning can be felt for their own sake. Through Kant, we understood the inner structure of aesthetic judgment, the free harmony of imagination and understanding, the disinterested pleasure that does not seek progression. Through Kant, we understood the inner structure of aesthetic judgment, the free harmony of imagination and understanding, the disinterested pleasure that does not seek possession, the paradoxical claim to universality that arises from a shared human sensibility. Through Dewey, we understood the outer arc, how aesthetic experience grows out of everyday rhythms, how it unifies perception, emotion, and meaning, and how artworks structure a temporal journey of tension and resolution. We then saw how painting, music, literature, and film each organize time and attention in distinctive ways, guiding our senses along specific paths. We considered how artworks direct perception through framing, emphasis, rhythm, and atmosphere, and how meaning arises in the interplay between form and the active participation of the viewer or listener. Beyond the arts, we recognized aesthetic experience in nature, in everyday objects, in urban spaces, and in social rituals. We argued that aesthetic experience provides a way of knowing reality that cannot be replaced by concepts, that it educates perception, offers unity in a fragmented world, and creates shared meanings that support community. Finally, we explored the transformative power of aesthetic perception. Art reveals dimensions of the familiar world that habit hides. It makes the familiar strange and the strange familiar. It enlarges our sense of what is real and of who we are. In all these ways, art is both a way of seeing and a way of being. It is not an escape from reality, but a fuller engagement with it. In the next lecture, we turn to the classical ideal of beauty. Having analyzed the structure of aesthetic experience, we will ask how thinkers in the ancient Greek and Renaissance traditions understood beauty itself. Our discussion will focus on harmony, proportion, and order, on the legacy of Pythagorean mathematics, according to which beauty reflects the underlying structure of the world, on beauty in Greek sculpture and architecture, on metaphysical dimension of beauty in Plotinus, who saw beauty as a path of ascent for the soul, and on Renaissance theories of perfect proportion that reinterpreted the classical heritage. Lecture 3 will show how the classical ideal of beauty, the thought that beauty manifests order and harmony, has continued to influence modern aesthetics, and why many still see beauty as the sensuous revelation of the world's structure.